Hello everyone, it is your figure break, and today on your break, we're going to be comparing Goodspawn Company's 1/7 scale Jeanne and Max Factory's 1/8 scale. So sit back, relax, and enjoy your break. Okay, so Goodspawn Company's and Max Factory's Jeanne figures. A lot of people have been asking me, hey, which Jeanne figure should I get or whatever. This video will hopefully help you determine which Jeanne figure is going to suit your needs. And there is some differences between them, some of them major, some of them minor. So let's get into the first part of this review, or comparison rather, of the outfits on these two figures. Goodspawn Company's tends to have a more matte, flat look to the paint job. Not saying that there's no shading, it's just the paint just doesn't seem to be as shiny. Whereas a Max Factory's does tend to be a little bit more shiny when it comes to the metal part for armor. And then of course the trim on the edge tends to be a little bit more shiny. And also it has more sculpt work to it and more sculpt detail to it. Whereas Goodspawn Company's tends to be a little bit more flat and tends to not have too much detail to it. But both of them do have a decent amount of shading to them. Max Factory's may be a little bit more prominent, but Max Factory also tends to be a little bit more extreme with their shading. So if that suits your needs or not, I don't know. That's obviously for personal taste. Overall though, both of the sculpt work and the paintwork is pretty good on both of the outfits of these figures. The hair of the figures, this is where you get to see a very big difference between the two figures. Max Factory's tends to have more of a candy-like texture to it. It reminds me of banana flavored Laffy Taffy, where it's kind of shiny and it just looks like taffy. Doesn't have that much shading to it, but it has a little bit more of a shine to it, which again is Max Factory's kind of forte of just having really shiny paint on a lot of their figures. Whereas Goodspawn Company's does have still good sculpt to it, just like Max Factory's does, but it tends to have more shading paired with the sculpt work. So you get to see lighter, blonde colors, darker blonde colors without and threw in the ponytail. So again, it's a personal preference. If you really like shady hair, probably should go with Goodspawn Companies. If you don't really care about it, but maybe care more about sculpt detail, I would probably go with Max Factories. The faces of the two figures is another pretty big difference between them. Goodspawn Company's is much more easier to see and it has more of a battle cry faceplate to it. So if you like your action poses of your figures, Goodspawn Company might be your forte. Whereas with Max Factory's, the face is a little hard to see. She has more of a stoic kind of expression on her face and a more determined face. But it's really, really hard to see and you have to be at just the right angle to see it. That also just seems to be a very big style with Jeanne, especially the earlier versions of Jeanne. And you'll tend to notice as you're looking at these two figures, Max Factory's tend to be a little bit more based on the Light series novel. And in fact, when you look on the box of the Max Factory one, it says Fate Apocrypha on it rather than the Goodspawn Company one, which actually says Fate Grindora both on the box and even on the figure base itself. And speaking of the base of the figure, both of the bases are obviously vastly different from each other. Max Factory's just being a plain old black base, no design put onto it whatsoever, whereas Goodspawn Company's at least has some kind of design on it. Tends to be very reminiscent of all of the other Goodspawn Company Saberface figures where there's just a tile floor on the base. So it's kind of nice if you have the other Goodspawn Company Saberface figures, you can have somewhat the still complete set and it matches with all the others. So I would say if you're just looking for a Jeanne figure just to put in your collection, Max Factories will suffice. However, if you have that completionist in you and that collector in you, I would probably go with Goodspawn Companies then to match with your other Goodspawn Company Saberface figures. Okay, now getting into the flags of these two figures. That is what's really going to make or break of you getting which Jeanne figure you're going to get, because that's when space becomes a very big issue. But first off, as it goes to the sculpt and the paintwork of the flags, Max Factory again has that shiny gold paint onto it, and it also has extreme sculpt work to it and very deep shading to it. The flag almost looks blue rather than white, to be honest with you. And then when you go over to Good Small Companies, tends to not be as shady or, not as shiny of a gold paint either. However, the flag definitely looks a little bit more white with just a little bit of blue shading, but sometimes subtlety is better because it doesn't ruin the colors or anything like that. So again, personal preference. If you like extreme shading, Max Factory. If you like subtle shading, probably Good Small Company. Now, when it comes to the actual size of the flags, Max Factory's flag overall tends to be a little bit more confined to the base of the figure. It doesn't stick too far out. It does a little bit, but not in any extreme manner. The Max Factory one also, the space that it takes up tends to be more forward of the figure rather than behind of the figure. And then you go to a very big extreme when you go to Good Small Companies, where the flag is just ridiculously long. In fact, from the front of her faceplate to the very far back of the flag is a total foot of space. That is a lot of space for a figure to take up in one direction, for that matter. And the other thing too is Max Factory's flag tends to be very, very stable. You don't have to worry about any bumping or shaking to suddenly lose the positioning of the flag. And when you go to Good Small Companies, they came up with this really kind of lackluster method, to be honest with you, of having these two stands that kind of go off on their own, and they don't have a very big base to them, so they easily slip off and move around with just the slightest of bumps. And most of the time, I don't even need this second one. In fact, if I use this one, the stabilization of the flag becomes haphazard. It actually hinders the stability of the flag, and I tend to just have to use this one. Now, another method that I have found is that if you, say, have the figure closer to the wall, you can actually prop the flag up against the wall a little bit. There's risks with that, obviously, where you can mess up the paint on the very front of the flag, so use that to your discretion, but if you're really in a pinch and you just want a little bit more stability, that is an option. Okay, so when it comes to a definitive winner in this comparison of these two figures, I really can't choose one, unfortunately. I know that's a cop-out, but here's my reasoning why. Although Good Small Companies does take up a lot of space, and it really does, and the flag is kind of unstable, if you're able to stabilize the flag and have the real estate in your collection for a pretty big figure, if you're a completionist, where you have all the other Good Small Company Saberface figures, Jeanne is going to look better in your collection, in my opinion. It has the matching base, the scale size matches, and then also the shading isn't going to stick out too much more than the other Saberface figures by Good Small Company. It more matches with the other Saber figures by Good Small Company. But if you are a sole Jeanne collector and only collect Jeanne figures, Max Factory is then probably going to be a better choice for you, in my opinion. It's more confined to the base, still takes up a lot of space, don't get me wrong, but it is more confined, and you can probably find better real estate in your collection when it comes to this figure. However, the shading tends to be a lot more in your face, and if you have the other Good Small Company Saberface figures, it's probably going to stick out way too much, also due to the fact that it's a different size as well. So it doesn't really match in your collection. So if you're a completionist, go with the Good Small Companies. If you just want a really nice Jeanne figure, Max Factories will suffice just as well. Both of these figures are great. Each figure has its pluses and minuses, but I would say the big three factors that you need to determine when it comes to the figures: space, your own personal preference when it comes to paintwork, and then of course if you're a completionist when it comes to collections. If you match any two of those points when it comes to either one of these figures, I would probably go to them. So let's say if you have space and you're a completionist, but you're okay with maybe not as forwarding paint job or as prominent of a paint job on it, go with Good Small Companies. You'll be happy with it. However, if you don't have that much space, you're not really too much of a collector, but you really like kind of prominent paint job, and you're okay with not having a whole bunch of figures in your collection, or don't have a lot of figures in your collection when it comes to figures, Max Factories will probably suffice just for you. Again, Both of these figures are great, and each company did a really good job on them. Okay, everyone, that concludes my comparison of Max Factory's 1/8 scale Jeanne and Goodsman Company's 1/7 scale Jeanne. I really hope you enjoyed this comparison. If you want to see more videos like this, make sure that you subscribe, hit the notification bell, and leave a like down below, and a comment on what your thoughts of are these two figures and which one is your definite winner. And I really hope you enjoyed your break too. And I'll see you in the next video. See you later. Hello, I would like to take this moment to thank my Patreons, especially Ice9EX, Jessica, Dimmick, and Neat. Thank you very much for becoming Patreons for this channel. It is much appreciated. And if you would like to become a Patreon yourself, there's a link in the description down below. Thank you.